On the 8th of September 2022, the world came to a standstill as the longest reigning British monarch in history, Queen Elizabeth II, passed away inside of Balmoral. Immediately, Operation London Bridge was set into motion, a funeral plan in which the Queen's death would be announced, and this would culminate in her burial. Many would have expected Elizabeth II to be buried inside of Westminster Abbey, amongst many of the most famous and greatest monarchs to rule over England and Britain. But Westminster Abbey is rather full when it comes to burials and tombs, and there is limited space. She chose to be buried inside of St George's Chapel, in a vault that she had commissioned for her parents to be interred, and she had made sure there was enough space for a few more coffins to be placed in this vault. But what is the royal vault like that contains Elizabeth II's coffin? And why is it so different to the actual royal vault inside of St George's? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Queen Elizabeth II was born on the 21st of April 1926, never expecting to become queen, but after her uncle, Edward VIII, abdicated in 1936, her father became King George VI, and she became heir to the throne. When her father died in 1952, the young Elizabeth ascended to the throne at just 25 years old. Her coronation in 1953 was a landmark event, the first to be televised, and it made her one of the most recognisable figures in the world. For 70 years, she reigned through immense change. She was queen during the end of the British Empire, the Cold War, the digital revolution, and even the COVID-19 pandemic. Through it all, she became a steady presence, someone who seemed to embody the nation itself. Her image was on coins, stamps, banknotes, and even biscuit tins. To millions, she represented continuity, tradition, and a quiet sense of duty that transcended politics. By the time Queen Elizabeth reached her mid-90s, she had become visibly frailer, yet she continued to work, carrying out virtual audiences and meeting dignitaries. In 2021, her beloved husband, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, died at the age of 99 after more than 73 years of marriage. The Queen attended his funeral under strict COVID restrictions, sitting alone in St George's Chapel, an image that deeply moved the public. In the months following Philip's death, her own health began to decline. She cancelled several public engagements due to mobility issues and appeared increasingly delicate. Despite these challenges, she remained determined to serve until the very end, and in June of 2022, the United Kingdom celebrated her Platinum Jubilee, marking 70 years on the throne. It was a moment of national pride and emotion. Though she appeared only briefly on the Buckingham Palace balcony, her presence delighted crowds who gathered in their thousands. Her final public act came on the 6th of September 2022, when she met with outgoing Prime Minister Boris Johnson and appointed Liz Truss as his successor. The meeting took place at Windsor Castle in Scotland rather than Buckingham Palace, a sign of her declining mobility. A photograph released from that day showed her smiling, using a walking stick but noticeably frail. Few realised it would be the last image of her alive. 2 days later, on the 8th of September 2022, Buckingham Palace released an unusual statement. Doctors were concerned for Her Majesty's health. This rare communication immediately drew attention. News anchors adopted sombre tones, and family members began to travel to Scotland. Prince Charles, now King Charles III, and Princess Anne were already at Balmoral. Prince William, Prince Andrew, Prince Edward, and Sophie, Countess of Wessex, rushed to join them. Prince Harry, who happened to be in the UK for an event, also made the journey north, though he arrived after her passing. At Balmoral, surrounded by family and her closest staff, Queen Elizabeth II died peacefully that afternoon. She was 96 years old. The official time of death was recorded as 3:10 p.m. BST. The cause of death, according to her death certificate later released by the National Records of Scotland, was simply old age. Her death marked not only the passing of a monarch, but the end of a living link to Britain's wartime generation. She had served as head of state under 15 prime ministers, from Winston Churchill to Liz Truss, and had met every US president since Harry Truman, except Lyndon B. Johnson. At 6:30 p.m, the BBC interrupted its programming to announce her death. Newsreader Hugh Edwards, dressed in black, solemnly read the statement from Buckingham Palace. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. Across the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, tributes poured in immediately. Crowds began to gather outside Buckingham Palace, laying flowers and lighting candles. The rain fell softly as people sang "God Save the Queen." In a matter of hours, the new monarch was proclaimed King Charles III. World leaders also paid tribute. US President Joe Biden called her a stateswoman of unmatched dignity, while French President Emmanuel Macron said she embodied the British nation's continuity and unity for over 70 years. Landmarks across the world, from the Eiffel Tower to the Empire State Building, were illuminated in her honour. The Queen's death triggered Operation London Bridge, the detailed plan long prepared for this moment. Flags were lowered to half-mast and church bells rang across the country. The words "London Bridge is down" were the coded message sent to government officials to begin the carefully choreographed days of mourning. Her coffin remained at Balmoral for several days, draped in the Royal Standard of Scotland and adorned with a wreath of flowers. Members of the royal household and local staff were given a chance to say goodbye. The Queen's body was then taken by road to Edinburgh, passing through small towns where crowds lined the streets in silence. At the Palace of Holyrood, her coffin rested overnight before being carried in a solemn procession along the Royal Mile to St Giles's Cathedral. Thousands of mourners filed past her coffin during a 24-hour vigil, paying their respects. After this, her coffin was flown to London aboard the Royal Air Force's plane, greeted by Prime Minister Liz Truss and members of the royal family. It was then taken to Buckingham Palace and later to Westminster Hall, where she lay in state for 4 days. During the laying in state, the queue of mourners stretched for miles along the River Thames, at times reaching 10 miles long. People waited up to 24 hours to pass her coffin, some through the freezing night. More than 250,000 people were estimated to have filed past her casket, bowing their heads or quietly weeping as they paid their final respects. Inside of Westminster Hall, the Queen's coffin rested on a raised platform called a cataflask, draped in the royal standard and topped with the imperial state crown, orb and sceptre. Soldiers from units that had served her personally stood guard in the solemn vigil, including members of the household cavalry and the yeoman warders from the Tower of London. On the 19th of September 2022, the state funeral of Queen Elizabeth II took place, the first since that of Sir Winston Churchill in 1965. The service was held at Westminster Abbey, where she had been married and crowned, bringing her life's journey its full circle. Heads of state, royalty, and dignitaries from around the world attended, including US President Joe Biden, Japan's Emperor Naruhito, and many European monarchs. An estimated 4.1 billion people worldwide watched the ceremony, making it the most viewed broadcast in history. After the service, her coffin was carried through London on a gun carriage, followed by King Charles III and members of the royal family. Crowds lined the streets in silence while Big Ben tolled and cannon fire echoed from Hyde Park. The procession then travelled to Windsor, where a committal service took place at St George's Chapel, the same place her husband Philip had been buried the previous year. Later that evening, in a private family ceremony, the Queen was laid to rest beside him in the King George VI Memorial Chapel, alongside her parents and her sister, Princess Margaret. Now the King George VI Memorial Chapel was actually commissioned by Elizabeth II, as she wanted a suitable place to inter her father and mother following their deaths. With this, a small chapel was built onto the side of St George's in Windsor, and in the centre is a small underground burial vault, This vault has enough space for 6 coffins, as in 3 monarchs and their consorts. This means that presumably Charles III will be interred in the same vault with his consort Camilla, and then this vault will be full up. Elizabeth II's sister Margaret had her ashes placed in the vault, and she was cremated, with one reason for this being there was little space in the vault for her. The vault contains the coffins stacked on top of each other. For example, King George is interred in the vault. On top of his coffin is his wife's coffin. Elizabeth II's husband, Prince Philip, who died in 2021, had been placed inside of the royal vault following his funeral, as presumably it was known the Queen herself was ill and probably did not have many more years to live. When the time came to inter Elizabeth II in the vault, Philip's coffin was brought from the royal vault and was then lowered into the King George VI Memorial Chapel. He may have been placed underneath as he died before Elizabeth, and Elizabeth's coffin may sit on top. A ledger stone was then secured over the vault, showing who was buried there. The vault is nothing spectacular, just a small stone hole in the ground in which the ledger stone sits on top. At the bottom of the slab are fixings in which the vault can be lifted and opened for inspection or interment of the next monarch. The vault will be cool, as it's underground, and it's not believed there have been any lights or electricity placed within it to shine onto the coffins. Also, this is not accessible from any other way than taking the ledger stone off, and it is not connected to the much larger and much more populated main royal vault within St George's Chapel. Today, Queen Elizabeth II lies in the manner that she would have wanted to, at rest next to her father, King George VI, her mother Elizabeth, and her husband, Prince Philip, as well as the ashes of her sister, Margaret. To save space, the coffins of the monarchs and their consorts are placed on top of each other, and there is space for 2 more burials, this being presumably for Elizabeth II's heir, at the time of writing the current monarch and his consort. Thank you for watching, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.